Semi-sloppy, randomish video. Didn't make any notes. Kind of just a response. There's been a couple videos made associating DNA with us and our evolution, maybe, or how much control we have over DNA versus how much the DNA controls us. And then sort of a reprisal of the weekend Stickam. A lot of good discussions. I had a really kind of a funny night last night. It was really late, and it ended up being me and Ian Crossland, a guy named Benny, and Matt. And it was kind of, it was kind of nostalgic. It reminded me of my less than sober days in my youth. And a good conversation. Anyway, regarding philosophy, there was a couple of nights where I tried to get on the subject of the fact that we are programmed by DNA, but we don't really have much influence over it. We're not really selecting for anything in the human race, and we're not genetically really evolving intellectually towards that disposition. The man that existed 50,000 years ago is pretty much just as competent intellectually as we are, and we haven't done much to improve on that genetic heritage. We did become a little eccentric as we took over the world. We became separated into groups, and we did evolve distinct characteristics. But now that the world's gotten smaller, we're melting pot that back into a more unified or generic, human code. But there's no selection really going on. We're not creating a human pedigree, especially on the constituent of intelligence. Most people who breed, most people who reproduce, aren't the most intelligent people on the planet, or the ones that demonstrating the most intelligence. They're certainly hardy folk, living in hard circumstances, but they're not the most intelligent.
Anyway, so genetically we're not going anywhere. We're not going to grow a bigger brain or anything like that, even if we had 100,000 years, because we're not selecting for that. The only way some characteristic that you've been disposed to possess is capable of reaching the future is for you to reproduce. If you don't reproduce anything you are disposed to be by your nature or your genetics, will not make it into the future. Just that simple. We still got to live by the laws of the bacteria, and I would argue that we're still basically controlled by that law. And we're basically a consuming machine, and the end result is an expansion of population. We're built to be unsustainable, and the only way we can be sustainable is to fight our nature, not live our nature, but fight it. There's a lot of people who sanctify nature, glorify nature, idealize nature, and that's certainly something I fight against, because nature doesn't deserve the credit. Nature doesn't deserve respect. It deserves our criticism almost, but I would say first it deserves fair scrutiny, and people aren't willing to apply that scrutiny because they have basically made it sacred. They've presumptively declared that nature knows what it's doing. And it's just a presumption, it's a declaration, it's not based on any logic. Nature's crude forces, that's all we have evidence of, is crude forces. There's no evidence of any intelligent design anywhere in the system. So, getting to the point I was trying to make that I just can't seem to articulate in a manner capable of convincing too many, we're basically designed to be attached to this thing called life. What we describe as attractive and beautiful and awe-inspiring and all those things is pretty well designed into us, because to be enthusiastic, to be capable of reproducing, to be committed to living. To have children, you have to basically believe you're not imposing a negative thing on them. You have to believe you're doing them a favor. So you have to be fairly addicted to the life process to be willing to impose it on somebody else. And so that character trait, that disposition, whether probably mostly derived through education and understanding, but there might be a genetic component to a disposition that disposes us towards being willing to struggle to live, being willing to fight for it. I brought up the example of the elephant man and slavery. The elephant man, in spite of a hideous life in terms of the physical obstacles to overcome, still struggled to live. He wanted to live. He desired what life provided. Part of that might be a fear of death, but there certainly was a commitment, a passion for living, in spite of what were, huge obstacles, a high price to pay for whatever satisfaction he could gain from life. And he wasn't making a value, like none of us. It's very hard to make this a pure value judgment regarding what life is and what it means. I've analogized life to rats in a maze, and that we can look at it and observe it and scrutinize it, and just try to figure out what it means and what the rats get out of it and what they're paying and what the price is worth paying, and see if the price of admission is worth the glory, the satisfaction we gain from it, whatever accomplishment there is to be had in it. And so everybody's going to say, well, that's a subjective definition, and everybody has their own personal definition of a life worth living. Most people, if really pushed, would concede that they wouldn't want to have to live if they had a face tumor that was pushing their eyes out of their head and they were, in horrible pain and very uncomfortable. They would say, yes, I'd probably want to die, or choose to if I had the option. And so they would say that, yes, there is a point where life isn't worth living. But they always have to be pushed to that question. And it is basically because we are designed to be addicted to what living provides. I mean, that's the way the system works. That's the way natural selection disposes organisms to be. It's the idea is to make us want it, and it's that want that clouds or pollutes or distorts our perception of what life is accomplishing and what it's doing. So there's lots of people, like I said, who just sanctify life, who just sit there and will look at nature and they will just presume it rational, that it has a purpose, that it intends to do something, even though they can also concede that it's crude forces and that there's really no room for any kind of judgment. They will still say, because they are awed by a perception of beauty when they look at the universe, or when they look at the earth, or when they look at a tree, that perception of beauty somehow justifies or rationalizes or endorses some perception that this is all worthwhile. And also use some notion of balance, as if the fact that the biosphere always finds balance is a concession that it's making sense. And the balance is all parasitic. And so, yeah, you throw an asteroid at Earth, it will find a new balance. It's just like throwing a rock in a pond. You'll create some ripples, but it will find its level again. And the biosphere does the same thing. And there's nothing special in this particular balance. This isn't more perfect than some other balance, or better than some other balance. And so there's no need to have reverence for nature, is the bottom line, and that we can do better. Like I said, we are designed to have more children than would be sustainable if every individual did what nature directed it to do. We would overpopulate and destroy ourselves. And so we have to fight our nature to become sustainable. And in other ways, we can fight nature to make life better, to provide for a higher quality of life for people, to eliminate the exploitation that exists in our nature, because our nature is bacterial. We are selfish individuals who have our own personal drives, desires, needs, preferences, and prejudices. And there's nothing deliberate or intelligent in those in the design of those preferences, and so they can't be used in judging the equation of what pain is worth what pleasure. So I've basically made the argument that the negatives, the suffering, the miseries, the horrors that go on have a more definitive value, a more knowable negative quality than the pleasures that we put on the scale to compensate for those negatives, because our pleasures are corrupted by our addiction. If it wasn't for the value we innately place on things, the scale wouldn't be able to see that pleasure as meaning much, because that pleasure is made out of merely fulfilling deprivations. The pleasures are more or less a result of satisfying a negative that's innately built inside of us. And so removing a negative is not necessarily a positive.
But we are perceiving it as one, and therefore we are justifying balancing the scales of this extra negative by balancing against the fact that we remove some negative. And so that process doesn't come to a positive number, it at best can reach a neutral. So I'd use the analogy that nature creates us with holes in us, and that we spend our life attempting to fill those holes, but we can never fill all the holes even in ourselves, let alone in all the other individuals that exist. And we sometimes, through our selfish behavior, drill more holes in other people by exploiting them, by mistreating them. And so net, it's very difficult for us to actually create something of substance.